Hello, everyone, and welcome to the FCC Young Farmer Summit. My name is Caitlin Dubin, and I am thrilled to be your host today. I am delighted to be in this virtual room with hundreds of amazing young folks involved in agriculture, food and beverage, and all related businesses that support feeding the world. I'm a grain farmer from Southern Alberta. I'm also a storyteller and a community builder. I have had the absolute privilege of celebrating the stories of women in agriculture through my podcast, the Rural Woman Podcast, since 2019. I hope you are ready for an afternoon full of digging into the business side of farming. You're going to learn from industry experts, connect with your peers, and get the knowledge you need to head into this next season. Myself and this amazing group of speakers you're about to see have been on the road traveling across Canada, and we are excited to bring the band back together one more time to share these amazing presentations with you. While today's session is being delivered virtually, wherever we find ourselves in Canada, we are on traditional Indigenous territories with rich traditions, stories, and histories that we have an opportunity to be curious about and honor. I want to acknowledge that I am coming to you from my farm in Southern Alberta on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains. I pay respect to the Blackfoot people, past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. This recognition is more than an acknowledgement of territory. This is about recognizing Indigenous people across Canada and to honor them as original caretakers of the land that we work, live, and play on. With respect to the diversity and strength of all Indigenous people, may we continue to learn and unlearn. Before we dive into our agenda, we have a little housekeeping. As you may have noticed, there is a chat on the right-hand side of your screen, and we would love it if you could tell us where you're joining in from today. There is also a Q&A button, a little question mark. If you have any questions for the speakers, please put them in there and we will get to as many questions as we can after each speaker. If you have any technical support questions about the virtual platform, there is a blue support button down on the bottom of the screen. We have a great AV team working behind the scenes with us today, and that will be able to assist you. This session will be recorded, and everyone who's registered for this event will receive a link to the recording in a few days. You can rewatch the speakers you need to and share with those who could not join us today. Okay, that is it. Are you guys ready? I'm so ready. Let's get started with our first speaker. What better way to kick off this virtual summit on farm business management than with Heather Watson, the Executive Director of Farm Management Canada. Heather leads this national nonprofit organization dedicated to enhancing farm business management practices across Canada and has been recognized as one of Canada's influential women in Canadian agriculture in 2022. Let's give the warmest of welcomes to Heather. Welcome, friend.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you loud and clear, and we are so ready for you. Take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you, Caitlin. It's hard to be nervous before an event like this when you've got the amazing Caitlin, who is just so talented and experienced to kind of pave the way ahead for you. So thank you so much to FCC and the organizers for allowing us to be part of today's presentation. We've had a lot of fun going across the country, kind of like a little road show with the rest of the speakers. And so I'm Heather, and I have the privilege of leading the team and everyone at Farm Management Canada. We're located in Ottawa, where I was just reporting it's snowing. And I get to talk about farm business management today. So to all the young farmers, how can you take the lead in managing your farm from a business perspective? So I'm just going to, there we go. We're going to start with some questions. So I do like to be a little interactive with the audience. So if you want to just, I know you've been active in the chat, I've seen it already. If you want to tell me, how are you feeling about the future of the farm and your role within it? You can just put it in the chat here. Oh, Stacy's already prompted you there. And just to give everyone a chance to really kind of settle in and be like, the future looks bright, or maybe I'm uncertain, or the future looks a bit hazy, but I'm confident that I'm going to do a good job. Oftentimes we get responses like, I'm feeling overwhelmed, or I'm feeling excited, or I'm feeling hopeful. And I mean, there's lots of different feelings going on, right, about the future, but especially this event is important because it focuses on, the next generation of farmers. So it's really important to know how you feel in facing the future of farming. Certainly it's been turbulent times, especially with what's going on kind of with our neighbors to the south and of course across the world as well. So yeah, you might be feeling a little uncertain, or you might be feeling a little maybe resistant to what's being thrown at you. And I just want you to know that that's okay. If you're feeling stressed, anxious, and overwhelmed, it's okay. And I want to start this presentation by saying you are not alone. So we've done some research in, you think it might be, interesting and funny for a farm business management group to do research, but I was sitting at a conference and they were talking about, the effect that stress and anxiety can have on just, your daily life. You can be feeling kind of emotionally irregular. So you don't know whether to laugh or cry, or maybe you're angry all the time or irritable. Maybe you're losing a sense of, I like getting up in the morning and doing this, or I can't sleep at night because I'm worried about everything going on. And we got to thinking how those feelings and behaviors can really impact the way you're managing your farm, and especially because you're farming with your family. And so if you're coming to work and you're not excited about it, or you're taking those attitudes home, that can really affect, maybe the next generation's feelings about, do I want this life for myself? Do I want to farm like this? And so it's just, I think, from a young person perspective, maybe giving your parents a break sometimes to understand that, it's certainly not easy and we all have things going on. And so from our research, we found that, 3 out of 4 farmers are feeling overwhelmed by stress and anxiety. And the vast majority of that is caused by 3 stressors. So we asked about everything under the sun, and it came back to number 1 was uncertainty and feeling a loss of control. And number 2 is financial pressures, certainly understandable, and then workload pressures and lack of time. And so I don't know if you find those results surprising. We didn't find them surprising, but we found them kind of encouraging, because I think that by focusing on the business side of farming helps put us in a place of more certainty and control. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, I want to talk about 2 really interesting pieces that we pulled from the research. And so when we asked about levels of stress and we asked about the top stressors, so women and young farmers actually were affected by those top 3 stressors, but also 2 other stressors. And so those were maintaining family and farm team harmony and farm transition. So not only were they more stressed about all the other factors going on, but these 2 kind of rose to the top. And so it's important within the context of a conversation about how do we take the lead in farm management excellence to understand that, in order to do so, we need to figure out how do we kind of bridge this gap between the feelings we're feeling today, the uncertainty, the pressure, the anxiety, and how we can create a better future. And I know there's other speakers today to speak about that as well, and kind of show a roadmap forward, which is great. But just understanding the context that we're in is really important. So anyone who knows me knows that I love planning. I love it because, we talk about the number 1 stressors, uncertainty. Well, guess what planning does? Planning helps bring certainty. It helps you kind of look at, what's the picture of your future? Where are you today? And how might you get to where you want to go? And then what happens if there's roadblocks? What happens if obstacles come in the way? How can you, take a detour? Or, it's like hopping your truck and thinking, I don't know where I'm going and I don't know when I'll know I'll get there, but we're just going to keep driving. And that's really no way to move forward. So the power of planning is really that roadmap to success. And so again, in our research, I'll just put these up. right away. But our research found that, not only does planning support reduce stress and anxiety and greater peace of mind. So, I can go to bed in the comfort of knowing I've done everything I can, or, there's not that mystery out there of like, well, what if prices fall? What if interest rates rise? You have done the planning and the contingency planning to know what's going to trigger a change in your activities, and you're not just kind of leading leading at the front of your seat, as it were. Um, Also, through planning, you create habits for other beneficial business practices. So not only, more effective communication, getting everyone around the team and talking about the future of the farm and everyone's role within it, but things like setting a budget and adhering to a budget, benchmarking your performance against, say yourselves year after year, but then other operations as well. Seeking training and understanding, okay, if this is our plan, what kind of skills, what kind of practices do we need to put in place to get there? And, oh, maybe we need a little bit of help when it comes to marketing, or maybe we need a little bit of help when it comes to HR. So by having a plan, you can kind of see that bigger picture. You can see all the buckets that make, a farm business, and then figure out, okay, like, do we need to add a little spice to some of these buckets to make sure that we have everything we need to propel us forward. And back to kind of the mental health piece, those that had a business plan, and according to our research, had more effective coping mechanisms. So I talked about how, you can be emotionally unregulated, or you might isolate yourself. You might have difficulty sleeping. You might get angry and irritable. You might turn to substance abuse. So there's these really serious ramifications of, chronic and prolonged stress. In our research, we compared those that had a business plan, a written business plan, with those that didn't, and those that did had more positive coping mechanisms. So things like, well, I went back to the plan and kind of figured out, okay, where do we go from here? Like, we know that was our goal, but that path isn't going to work now. So what else can we do? And they went back and crunched the numbers. So, they had a budget to crunch the numbers from. Having some of these pieces in place, especially when things are, oftentimes we turn to business management when we're in a chaotic zone. But really, the time that we want to turn to business management is when things are going really, really well, because that's when you're in the headspace to dream and to think of, okay, what would happen, as opposed to feeling rushed and like, we need to make a split decision right now. And we might not be in the state of mind to do that. And then, of course, the big piece I always left to the end is, it is proven there's a measurable link between profitability, confidence, decision-making, more open communication, and business planning as well, which is the icing on the cake, as it were. When we did our study, we kind of asked, like, what has been the benefit of having a business plan to you? And one of the Saskatchewan farmers replied, well, it helps to know where you want to go. That way, difficult years don't seem so devastating. There's a plan in place to move forward and a vision for the future. So I think that sums up what we were saying very, very well. But what if it feels like a brick wall? And now I'm talking to, certainly the next gen. Oftentimes we hear, even I go to these learning events and I'm inspired by all these things I can do, like, oh, have a business plan and have an HR plan, or, work with a team of advisors, create an advisory board. But what if you go back to the farm and you just feel like you're hitting a brick wall and you're not getting any traction with your ideas and with what you want to change or what you want to bring to the farm? Well, it's important to understand that when it comes to farming, we're working off of passion, we're working off of legacy, we're working off tradition, we're working off of blood, sweat, and tears, where the hard work of previous generations is literally written into the landscape. You look out the window and it's the corridor, it's the acres, it's the way that we have develop the land around us. So it's important to understand, and I say this to the older generation too, or the founding generation, it's not just about your future, it's about theirs. But within the context of young farmers, it's thinking about, what are the things that are stopping this conversation from going ahead? Or what are the things that are blocking, making some change or making some progress on the farm? And so we'll go through some of those things just now. Call it resistance to farm business management within this context. So oftentimes there's a lack of shared values and beliefs. So we, believe it or not, I know this is crazy, but there's farmers out there that don't look at the farm like a business, don't believe it's healthy to look at the farm like a business. And so trying to introduce business practices just doesn't jive with what they believe about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And so not having shared values in terms of why are we doing what we're doing can really hamper planning for the future together. Also a fear of being vulnerable and not knowing all the answers, or feel it like we already talked about, that uncertainty and losing control is certainly, quite difficult in terms of thinking straight and making good decisions, but also they might not know all the answers, which is totally fair. But I think in farming, we put a lot of pride into, like, if there's a problem, I can fix it. We can get through anything, we know everything. But when it comes to things like treating the farm like a business, or transition planning, things like tax planning, things like, what is the best governance structure for us? That might be out of the realm of what we typically know about. And so that might bring up feelings of feeling vulnerable, and they might not necessarily want to admit, I'm not quite sure what you're asking there. Feeling overwhelmed. So no time to try something new. We talked about already stressed, already overwhelmed, and now you want to talk about business planning. Now you want to talk about farm transition. Are you kidding me, kind of thing. So just appreciating where they're coming from in terms of what might be putting up roadblocks for them. And it might be outside forces, it might be internal forces. And so I talked about lack of shared values, also lack of clarity. So understanding, if I'm an older generation, I don't even know what I want to do, right? Like, I'm not sure if I want to transition the farm, because who am I going to be? What am I going to do? My identity's been tied to the farm for so long. So what does that look like? And by the way, what do you want to do with the farm? And what value are you going to bring to the farm? And are you going to want to change things? Are you going to want to sell it? Things like that. There's certainly a lot of fear, and that produces anxiety and, all the assumptions out there. So what we want to see is conversations happen. Before we go there, yes, Caitlin has prompted for questions. Question time. So thinking about forms of resistance on your farm, feel free to put in the chat. I've got my little chat box here open. What kind of forms of resistance do you see on your farm? Or maybe you don't, and that's great too. Maybe you could say, you know what, my parents are actually like encouraging in every way. Put that too. It's not always about the like challenges or the negative, but we certainly hear that a lot. So feel free to, put in the chat. How do you see resistance coming up on your farm? It might even be a resistance of yourself. Like sometimes, lately we've had a lot of conversations about confidence and self-confidence. And there's confidence in some of the technical sides. So there's confidence in raising crops and raising animals, and maybe not the confidence to, have the hard conversations, or to lead the process, or confidence in yourself in other ways. And so there certainly can be forms of resistance. It's not just, again, it's not about them. It's not about you. It's about kind of together. So succession planning, not all successors on the same page. Yeah, Jennifer, we hear that a lot. Absolutely. And so I think what I'll do is I'll go, just for the sake of time, I'll go into the next slide, which is, okay, how do we overcome resistance to farm business management? And you can insert anything in there, really. Overcome resistance to transition planning, to marketing differently, to, I don't know, wearing stripes and polka dots, whatever the case may be. We're talking about human behavior. So when it comes to having conversations or thinking about having conversations with your parents or with, the generation that's farming that you're interested in taking over from, seek to understand. So really appreciating and taking the time to understand the family history, the farm history, values, goals, expectations, fears, and assumptions, because oftentimes, there's been some rough roads in the past, and that can really kind of cure how things are done today. So, maybe a risk was taken and it didn't pay off, and so we're never going to do that again. So understanding where these values and where these kind of beliefs come from is very important. Focusing on what's in your control. We talked from a mental health perspective, the uncertainty, the unpredictability, the ag sector. Yeah, like it's huge. It's risky business, but there's a lot of things you can control. You can control how often you meet and have conversations. You can control, do we have a written business plan? You can control, do we outsource our marketing? You can control, do we work on skills development? Do we, go to FCC's training programs and others? So focusing on what you can control can alleviate some of that stress, thinking, oh my goodness, like it's all too much. Assess and articulate your expertise, skills, and value you bring to the farm as the next gen. So really taking the lead and saying like, hey, look, like I've gone to school, I've got this, I've got passion for this. Like we don't have online marketing. Maybe I could, bring us into the TikTok world or bring us into the social media world in other ways. Or, I have a business degree and nobody's had that on the farm before. So maybe that can bring some positivity and experience. Planning. So even if you're the next gen, that's totally cool. You can take the lead on this. You can say, you know what, I'm gonna try and sketch out a plan and present it and see what they think. Like it shows ambition, it shows your willingness to take responsibility, your independence, and a little bit of confidence too. And then implement regular meetings focused on the business. I know we meet all the time, but focus on the business and what needs to happen to achieve everyone's professional and personal goals. And remember, it's not just about you, it's about them. And that goes both ways. Okay, I am running out of time here, but that is okay. Because and remember, help is available, and we'll go to a slide about the resources available. I like this quote just because anything that assures me that what we're doing is good is a good thing. So write it down. The rest of the slides are really about resources to help you on your way. So I can go through them fairly quickly because I know Stacy and the team at FCC are going to make these available to you. So there's resource centers, including ours at agriresources.ca and FCC's knowledge centers. We have like micro resources, like things like, oh, I don't know how to set up an agenda for a family team meeting. Well, we have a resource for that. I don't know how to start the conversation about transition as current gen or next gen. Well, we've all got resources for that. So I challenge you, whatever you can think of in terms of a resource you might like is probably already out there. We got assessment tools like you wouldn't believe, specifically in finances and transition planning, etc. I'm going to go a bit quick. Learning opportunities. So there's different conferences, there's different programs you can take. There's different workshops and other things available. Advisory support. So I borrow this phrase from a good friend in New Brunswick, Cedric McLeod, and he always says, do your best and hire the rest. And so, oftentimes when we think of advisors, we think of accountants and we think of lawyers and maybe bankers, and that's about it. But there is a whole slew of professionals out there to help you, especially if you're not sure how to communicate effectively, how to, feel comfortable in your own skin. There is a coach out there for all of your needs and opportunities as well. And you might be interested in joining peer groups, things like that. I will end just talking about farmer mental health and wellness. There's resources available in every province. So you can just Google farmer mental health in your province. You'll find resources there. I will skip the question, but you can write in the chat how you're feeling now. I hope you're feeling encouraged. I hope you're feeling hopeful. I hope you're feeling excited. And just remember that change is inevitable. Change is going to happen just like death and taxes, but growth is optional. Growth is where you choose what you're going to do with that change. And with that, I thank you very, very much.
unmute, it says. Heather, thank you so much for all of that amazing wisdom. I'm feeling more optimistic.
Good.
You did good. You did good. Thank you so much for
Awesome.
everything.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. If you want a copy of the resources Heather shared, you can reach out to Farm Management Canada. We will put the email in the chat, and in the email you will receive later today, you're also going to get all of the resources that she mentioned. As we all know, knowing your numbers and planning your business strategy is very important, and it's very intertwined. And we have just the man to walk us through these connections. Mark Verwey is a consultant at BDO, and he knows agriculture. He knows finances and business management. He has over 35 years experience as a chartered professional accountant. Please help me welcome Mark to the stage. Mark.
Thank you. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here.
It's so great to see you. Take it away.
All right, thank you. Again, my name is Mark Verwey. I'm with the accounting advisory firm BDO Canada LLP, and we have 80 offices across Canada. And one of our key industry groups is agriculture. So today I want to talk about the business of farming, and I'm really just going to kind of take it kind of next steps after what Heather was talking about. So the theme will be there's a strong relationship between financial success and financial awareness, and we always hear that. And that includes adopting a business mindset or mentality. So the gist of my conversation will be centered around that. But before we start, I just want to share the disclaimer that we have to share before we get into it. So if you can just take a few seconds to read that, we'll get on our way. Okay. So there's a good book out there called The E-Myth. And the premise behind that book, it discusses why small businesses fail. And small business is defined as a business that has less than 50 employees. So obviously most farms fall within that category. And the messaging from this book does relate to farming and producers. So I think I like reading this book with the message it gave me, because there's a relevance to it. And what they say in that book is the number one reason why small businesses fail is that they didn't realize how many hats they had to wear. And I'll give you a good example of that. Say you're an electrician and you're a really good electrician, and you've got your journeyman papers and you're doing well, and you're working for a business. And all of a sudden, the boss of that business starts to tick you off. And he does it several times, finally to the point where you say, well, I'm gonna go on my own. I'm gonna start my own business because I'm a great electrician and I know I'll do well. So you make the leap. And what happens is you realize when you're doing that, there's other hats you have to wear. Now you got to worry about finances. You got to buy a building. You got to finance a building. You've got to worry about marketing, because now you have to bring business to you. You don't have, because it's not coming to you otherwise. And you got to worry about labor. You need leverage. You have to work. You have people to work that need to work for you. And what you realize is you're wearing all these other hats and you're not really doing electrical work. And for a lot of people, that can be overwhelming. And statistics has it that most small businesses that start within a year, they fail. And really what they talk is because of the hats. And the hats we talk are roles and responsibilities. And I guess let's be clear here. When it comes to the definition of failure, it can vary. You know, bankruptcy, foreclosure, a lot of small businesses, that's the outcome. But for farming, that's not really the case. In farming, failing to achieve your greatest potential could be deemed a failure. Failing to maintain a competitive advantage. You're going to hear a lot of stuff coming forward in the future about productivity. And productivity is going to be important, and you'll need to be competitive when it comes to productivity, especially when it comes to innovation. Those are all important. So those are various definitions of failure. Now, when we look at farming in particular, let's look at the hats you have to wear in the context of farming. And there are various hats there. So we'll go through them. So, you know, the first hat is strategy and vision. And Heather talked about that. Your farm is going somewhere. You have to decide whether you're in the front seat or the back seat of that vehicle. If you're in the back seat, you're in trouble. If you're in the front seat, you are taking on strategy and vision. So that's one particular hat. Then you got to worry about production. And production has always been there. The electrician was good at production. Farmers are good at production. And that's where, but the challenges you have there is rising input costs. How do you be efficient in your operations? That's a challenge there. Now we go to marketing, another hat. Fluctuating commodity prices is a challenge there. And I heard an interesting comment where agriculture is one of the few industries where you buy your inputs at retail and you sell your product at wholesale, which means you're dealing with very, very small margins. So marketing becomes important. Human resources, another hat you have to wear. And what's unique to farming is you are managing labor and you're managing feelings because you're dealing with family, you're dealing with succession and transition, and that's all human resource related. Another hat, capital asset management. The cost of iron and the cost of dirt has never been higher. And how do you make sure that you're properly utilizing those assets? A combine now with a couple of headers can almost approach 1.5 million. That's what's one asset. So capital utilization is now another hat you have to wear. Technology and AI, a newer hat, but things are changing so fast. And you have to stay competitive globally because innovation is worldwide and you've got to be an adopter of the innovation as well. So that's important. Environmental rules and regulations coming to the forefront now. And I can tell you the lobbies and the SOBIs of the world are not going to diminish the regulations they have on food safety. Agri-Invest, if you tap out at the top amount for Agri-Invest, you have to now have to have an environmental plan. So that is not going to go away. And finally, finance. That is a critical hat because with rising debt levels, managing your debt is becoming more and more important because that's a fixed cost. You have your interest, you have your principal payments. That's hard to manage, and so you've got to really manage your finance. So those are the hats that you now have to wear. So you are very much like a business when it comes to looking at the hats. So the business, so we're talking about what Heather was saying, the problem now is hats create stress because of all the roles and responsibilities. But one of the best ways to reduce stress is to have a plan. And that's where you formalize your farming operations, treating it like a business. You create small, actionable steps to see progress. And with that progress, you celebrate success. Because creating a feeling of control and progress is important. Control trumps stress. So you want that feeling of control. So what is a formalized process? This is one right here that I propose, and it starts at the top with values and works its way down to tactics. And when we look at values, those are your core beliefs. And I really, for most farms, one of your core beliefs I have seen is kindness. That is prevalent with almost every farm that I deal with. Then how do you define success? A lot of times, we accountants, we say profitability is what's defines success, but there's more than that. There's family harmony. There's land and livestock care. That could help define success. Then have your vision. Where do you want your farm to be in a year, 3 years, 10 years? Again, you want to be in the front of the vehicle driving it, and that's where vision comes in. And finally, the last two things, strategies and tactics, that's what we're going to talk about today in terms of, getting those things done and how to really move your farm forward when it comes to treating it like a business. So if we talk about strategies, so strategies have a 1-year time frame, okay? This is where you focus on your hat. So each one of the hats you're wearing, we have 8 hats there. What strategies can you employ with that particular hat? And what I really encourage you here is to focus on the big rocks or the key strategies. Because you can easily use ChatGPT or Copilot to come up with strategies, but which ones are the most important? And there's a fairly easy way to do that. What you do is you take your list of strategies of a particular hat, and you rate them 1 to 10 in terms of which strategies would be the most impactful. The more impactful, the more difference it would rate it is, you would give it a higher number. So that's one way to measure. The next thing is look at what is the ease of implementation of that strategy? The easier it is to implement, the higher number you give it for a rating. And all you do then is you add the two columns together. The final number, the highest number, is the strategy you would pursue first, because you need to have a plan and a process. So that's important. So after strategies, then you look at tactics. Okay? Tactics are driven from strategies. Okay, so each strategy should have 3 or 4 tactics. They are a quarterly or monthly time frame that you want to get them done. This is where the rubber hits the road, because through tactics, you are in effect fulfilling your vision, but it starts with or ends with tactics. Okay, your tactics have to be smart. They have to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely, because there can be no ambiguity to your tactics, because it's got to be a yes or no whether you completed that tactic. Because oftentimes in your farming operation, you are going to allocate tactics to certain individuals within your team who are good at wearing certain hats. And then you have to ask yourself, did I get that done? It's got to be yes or no. And again, there lies the accountability that you need in your farming operation. So from there, we're actually going to go into an example now of the process. So what we're going to say is we're going to wear the finance hat, and we're going to talk about managing debt. So this is the hat we're going to wear. This is one of the 8 hats that we have to wear. So let's pick a strategy that we want to do within the next year. Okay. And what we want to do is we want to develop a better understanding of my debt position. That is a strategy. Okay. So from that strategy, what are 3 key tactics that I can employ to fulfill that strategy? And this is an example of 3 tactics that I have prioritized as being the most important. First of all, match the term of our loans with the life of the asset we purchased. That's a tactic. Calculate our debt service ratio, another tactic. And finally, what is our credit worthiness score? So you're going to assign that to a certain individual on the farm. They're going to get these tactics done. So let's go through each one of these tactics. So tactic 1 was the matching of the life of your loan with the life of the asset. And that's important because you want to match the profitability of that particular asset with the debt servicing period of that asset. So if you have a new piece of equipment, you want a term of a loan of 7 to 10 years. Older piece of equipment, 5 to 7 years. Say land or quota over a longer period, 20 to 25 years, gives you that matching. And I'll give you an example. I knew a producer who absolutely hated debt. So what they do is they would pay off everything as quick as they could. So if they bought a combine, a new combine, they say, hey, I want to turn this out over 3 years. And the financial institution would comply. But what would happen is they would lose out on opportunity. So if an opportunity came up, they couldn't capitalize because they had to make these aggressive debt payments. That was important. They were forced at times to sell crop, not because it was at its peak price, but because next month a debt obligation was coming up. So it completely handcuffed them without this matching principle. So I think this is important, and this is a tactic that you can employ. So another tactic that you can employ is calculating your debt service ratio. And I would argue that this is the most important ratio that you need to calculate on your farm. Okay, because this measures, in effect, the ability to service your existing debt. And the calculation you have there is what is your earnings before interest, amortization, and taxes, which is really your cash profitability before your obligations of your debt, divided by the interest plus the current portion of your long-term debt, which is what is due the next year. So in terms of looking at actual numbers, you have a farming operation that has a profit of $137,000. You add back the depreciation costs of a $95,000. You add back $100,000 in amortization or depreciation. You add back $3,000 in expenses or in taxes. That's your numerator. Your denominator are those same interest costs plus the current portion of long-term debt of $160,000. That's your debt service ratio. And it's 1.31, and often there's a threshold 1.25. So I would really encourage you as a tactic to learn how to calculate your debt service ratio, work with your financial institution, because where this becomes really important is if you want to go out and get a new loan, you got to be able to prove you can service your existing debt. If you have a major expansion coming, that what you would do there is you calculate your debt service ratio before the expansion, then calculate your debt service ratio after the expansion and present that to your institution, because you're going to have more profits after the expansion, but you're going to have more debt service costs. Do you still have a proper ratio? So I think that's important, the debt service ratio. And finally, the last ratio is your credit worthiness score. Everybody has a credit worthiness score. So it's up to you to go ask your financial institution what your credit worthiness score is, because this drives your interest costs. This reflects your level of risk that the lender is assuming. So are you 600? Are you 800 for a rating? What's a good rating? And how do you improve that rating to improve your debt costs? Because like we say, the cost of iron and dirt is becoming so high. How do you reduce your debt costs? So those are 3 tactics that we picked up from wearing simply the finance hat. Now, there are some caveats to this, okay? You need strong financial management. And what I say there is you need accurate, timely information. You got to make decisions that are right based on the right information, and you need your financial statements prepared on the accrual basis. And what I mean by that is when you look at your balance sheet, you want all your assets and liabilities on there. You want your capital assets, you want your receivables, you want your payables on there, because that is how you're going to manage your debt. That is how you can measure your net worth assessment, because you got to measure whether you're growing or not. Also, on your statement of operations, looking at profitability and cash flow management, that's got to be on the accrual basis, because you want to make sure that you can compare your effort, which are your expenses, with your results, which is your revenue. And it's got to be on the accrual basis. Okay, so a lot of times people will keep track on a cash basis. I would strongly suggest that you keep it on the accrual basis, because that is a way better at matching how you're doing. So we talk about some takeaways from this. Number 1, which is important, it's important to recognize the hats that you're wearing. And we highlighted 8 hats in a farming operation. Okay, it's important that you address each hat, because leaving one hat out of the equation could impact the success of your farm. Second takeaway, think big, but start small. So think big with your vision, your values, how you define success, but you have to start small with strategies and tactics, because that again is what's going to drive your vision by what you're doing. So that's very important. The third, you need to create a formalized process to your business, because successful businesses have a formalized process. And we talked about, and Heather talked about that. And I really think you should have regular meetings where you're talking about the farm, you're not talking about working in the farm. I would really encourage them to be monthly. And a monthly meeting only really needs 3 things for an agenda. One thing you want to talk about your financial results. Maybe during the year, it's your cash flow. What are your cash obligations? What are your financial results? Number 2, you want to talk about your business plan or your strategy. So you want to talk about, since the last meeting, what tactics did I complete? And what strategies am I working on? Then you want to say, before the next meeting, what strategy do I want to get done? What tactics do I want to complete? So you're creating that process. And then finally, another agenda item is, are there any really important issues that we just have to talk about because they've come up? What burning issues do I have? That's something you want to bring up as well. And I'd even suggest on a quarterly basis, have themes to those meetings. One could be, we're going to talk about capital addition plan for the next 5 years. Another theme could, for a quarterly meeting, be let's get into our financial results. Let's talk about key performance indicators, benchmarking, trend analysis, and looking at ratios, to get a better feel for our farm. And another one you should talk about is succession transition planning. Treat that like a habit that you're going to talk about that. So that's important. And finally, the 4th takeaway, it's very important to track and celebrate your successes, because what happens when you celebrate it, there's a drug in your brain called dopamine that it gives you a high. What then happens is you repeat the process. So you want to repeat what you're doing by celebrating your successes. So those are the key takeaways that I would have from my session. But I want to end this with a story. I want to talk about the British cycling team. And to give you some background on the British cycling team, prior to 2003, they had only won one Olympic medal since 1908. They had won no Tour de France's in 110 years. And that's the piece de resistance when it comes to cycling. They were so bad that suppliers didn't want their emblems on their jerseys. Okay? They were embarrassed. And this story comes from the book called Atomic Habits. If you want Atomic Habits, you want more detail of it. So what did they do? They went out and they hired a fellow named Dave Brailsford. He was a performance director. And he implemented the 1% improvement program. And his philosophy was aggregation of very small marginal gains would lead to significant results. The same thing as Japanese have a principle called Kaizen, same principle. And what happened? Well, he was hired in 2003. But here are some of the improvements he did before we go to the results. He redesigned the bike seats and tires. He improved the clothing. But that is something any performance director would do. But then he went beyond that. He looked at different massage gels to improve muscle recovery. He looked at better ways to wash hands to reduce catching a cold. Again, working with his athletes, the performers. He improved pillows and mattresses for his athletes so they had better sleeps before the contest or the cycling. And he even looked at the inside of the trucks, painted them completely white so that he could see any dust particles coming down. And if he saw them, he would make corrective measures. And he did hundreds of these things to improve the operations of his cycling team. And with that, from 2007 to 2017, they won 178 world championships, 66 Olympic and Paralympic gold medals, and 5 Tour de France's. And they attributed that to having the vision of winning, but more importantly, just doing small, tiny steps to improve. And that led to these results. And really, that's all we're kind of talking about today, is we talked about that one scenario, about that one hat you're wearing, developing a better understanding of the debt position. So this would be a snapshot of that particular farm, say September. What the blue denotes is actual amounts that have been completed. Tactics completed, the red not yet. You're already 2% closer to success given this. So this scenario, more tactics, more strategies, higher percentage. So I think it's really important to realize that small tactics will cause your farm to succeed, because really you want your farm to look differently at the end of the year as opposed to the beginning. It's through these tactics and processes. So that's the end of my presentation. So I want to thank you. If you would like a copy of this presentation, you can contact Melanie Britton at the email address I've given you. If you want more information or assistance or coaching on how to get started in treating your farm like a business, you can reach out to me at my address there. And also there's additional resources at Farm Credit Canada. And one of the key ones is Manage Your Farm Finances, which is a new one coming out. So with that, I wish you all the success in the world, and thank you for taking the time, and enjoy the rest of the presentation.
Mark, thank you so much for all of that presentation. There's so much good information in there, and we don't have time to get to the questions today, but you popped your email address up on there, and Stacey's going to put it in the chat too. So people are going to reach out with their good questions for you.
Thank you.
As Mark mentioned, FCC and experienced advisors from BDO Canada have collaborated to present Manage Your Farm Finances. It's a free online 3-course series designed for Canadian agricultural producers. These courses are actionable and interactive and are delivered in 3 parts. You will receive a link to the course after this event, or Stacey is going to pop it in the chat for you right now. Reach out to Mark for more information. Now, let's get on to our next speaker. EMILI is an industry-led nonprofit that works with producers, industry, and academia to grow a sustainable and economically resilient digital agricultural industry. Their aim is to increase the development and adoption of on-farm technology, connect ag tech entrepreneurs with support and resources, expand awareness of diverse career opportunities, and equip current and future workers in the agriculture and agri-food sectors with the tools, knowledge, and skills to make informed decisions about data and digital technology. Dan Lussier is the director of the Canadian Agri-Food Data Initiative. at EMILI and believes that by working closely with growers and technology innovators, we can help solve the industry's biggest challenges. Please help me welcome Dan to the stage. Hey, Dan. Can you hear me?
I can.
There you are. Take it away.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, everyone. It's really great to be here virtually. It's, I guess, now my fourth or fifth time being on this Young Farmers, in front of the Young Farmers audience, and it's great to be able to reach you wherever you're sitting today. My talk today is really focused on what I call, well, data literacy, and it's really to build some foundational skills that will support your technology decision-making as you go forward and thinking about your farm business. So just a little bit about EMILI, for those who don't know us. As you heard, we're based in Manitoba, and we're a nonprofit. But really what I want to leave you with is our core message is that our mission is to support both the development and adoption of digital technology in agriculture. So we love to work on both sides of that equation because that's how we really feel like we're going to make an impact over the long term and get good technology into the hands of farmers, putting it to work within their business. So today, really what I want to talk about is an introduction of Data 101 to get you grounded, but then in the second half to pass through talking about the ag tech contracts and data agreements that you'll see when you take on or sign up for a new ag tech tool. This is pretty practical, and hopefully it will answer some of the questions that I know growers have around things like data ownership and privacy. So leave you with both some foundations and then some really practical information you can use day to day or season to season as you're looking at new opportunities. Everything you're going to hear today is either comes from one of two places, either from this online course called Fundamentals of Farm Data, which is a data literacy course that's free and online on our website. You can go there and go much deeper than what I'm able to present in the 20 minutes today. And also we have some guidebooks on the legal topics, so contracts being one of them, but more recently one around data ownership as well. That's also on our website if you want to dive deeper. So let's get started in terms of Data 101. What I'm going to do here is really take a step back and just really try to build this up progressively rather than talking about specific types of, say, precision ag equipment or what you might do on farm, really to try to build that knowledge and an ability to get into this topic and go where you need to go in your farm business when it comes to data and digital technology. So really starting at the fundamentals of fundamentals, what do I mean when I say what do I mean when I say what digital agriculture? For here at EMILI, we like to take a really broad definition of this, and simply put, it's what you can see on the screen right now. It's putting data and digital tools to work on your farm to create new value and strengthen your farm business and manage risks. That's an intentionally extremely broad definition. It really applies to some of that technology you might see on screen or machinery, etc. And it captures that whole length and breadth of operations on farm, not just machines, but also back office operations, purchasing of inputs or sales of your farm products. And within that, you're going to find precision agriculture, but precision agriculture is a subset of that much larger category, digital agriculture, that of course is very much more focused on machinery and getting that machine to do more specific tasks in the field for precision applications. So once we have that working definition in place, the next step for me is to go and think about, okay, well, now that I kind of understand what digital agriculture technology can be, what's inside of that data? What kinds of data are we talking about? This really pays off because it lets you to be more specific when it comes to talking about the data on your farm and therefore put it to better use. We'll come back to that in a second. So what you can see on screen is what I like to call my catalog of agriculture data, but it's basically just a way to categorize that larger group of all kinds of different data and all kinds of different technology produced into some working categories that I find useful. So agronomic data, obviously about planting and the operations in the field, but livestock data, land data, so field boundaries, soils, and so on. Farm management data, and I've definitely underlined that. As a business, of course, you have a lot of different fundamental business data, human resources, finances, very important. Machinery and equipment data, so that today's modern machines produce an enormous amount of data. That's a lot of that precision ag equipment. But then last but not least, you have climate and weather data, which may come from exterior source, like a service you're subscribing to, but equally it could be an on-farm weather station like you see in one of the photos there. So the big thing I want to leave you with is the idea that too many people are too general when they say my farm's data or agriculture data. It really, really pays off to get more specific and talk about specific kinds of data that you're using for specific purposes. So try to get into that habit, right? Get into the habit of talking about more granular, more categorized, and more targeted and focused agriculture data so that you can figure out how you're going to use it and make it into something valuable. So now that we've built up a bit of that foundational, what is the technology, what is some of these data that we're talking about, the last sort of view that I want to leave you with is thinking about, okay, well, if I as a farmer, who else is in this ecosystem with me? And instead of thinking about, for example, in the value chain, we think about farm products or food that goes from the farm towards consumers. In this case, what I really wanted you to think about is where is your farm, or where could your farm be having a data interaction with a technology provider, with a service provider, and so on. And that's what defines the links inside of this ag data ecosystem. So if we put the farmer at the center, the farm at the center, you're going to have maybe some interactions with trusted advisors like agronomists, technology vendors, software companies. But equally, if you think a little bit more broadly, input suppliers, they may also have apps and other technology they're using and asking you to use in terms of purchasing, planning. Your buyers and food processors, but certainly financial institutions, insurance companies, the crop insurance corporation in your province. And lastly, government, both in terms of gathering information in terms of surveys of growers, but it could also be in terms of perhaps some regulatory compliance as well. So that's not exhaustive, but again, the key takeaway here is that there's this other network. That's the ag data ecosystem defined by all those different data interactions. And in the center of it, for yourself is your farm. And then it's up to you to sort of map out where these other links are in that chain. And that's a great way to see where's your data going and who are you doing data business with in a way, which, is a little bit different than where the food is headed down the value chain. So, in probably this may be the most important slide of the presentation in the sense that I think this is where a lot of things come together. We hear a lot about the different challenges around data collection or for example, and making use of new tools and learning required to get there. But to me, the most important thing you can take away is to link your data planning, your technology strategy to your farm business planning, to your farm's planning. And I think we heard that maybe 20 minutes ago from Mark, how important that is. Without starting with the end in mind when it comes to data and technology, it's just like any other part of your business. You're just not going to get, the kind of outcome, the kind of significant leverage that you're looking for. So a tool that you can use to do that in the context of data and technology is this ag data ecosystem, or ag data lifecycle, which is the series of circles at the very bottom of the screen. What that is, it's tracking the life of a data point or a data set from its creation through to its eventual disposal. And that lets you get into that same sort of mindset with your data as you are with other parts of your business. But here, I would really say the most important thing is you start in that usage. What am I going to use this data for? Then you go back and think, okay, good. Now, if I know what I'm going to use the data for, in terms of an outcome, an operation, an activity in my farm, I go think about how do I get it? How do I store it? How do I process it in order to get there, right? Folks often react and say, well, why am I worrying about disposal? I'm just going to keep data for all time. It's not realistic. Some of the data is very large. For example, like drone imagery, it's very, very large, very expensive to store that indefinitely. So you do have to think about, just like most things, what point is this no longer valuable to me, and at what point do I move to disposal? So in some cases you may keep it for a significant amount of time. In some cases where it's very expensive to store, like the drone imagery, that may be something you have to think about more in a more timely way. But long story short, this really animates, I think, a lot of the strategy, leveraging the different technology and data sets you could use to figure out how do I make this useful on my farm and create new value. So where can this all go? Assuming you're into a good flow, you've made some investments, you're gathering good data. Some of the future I want to show you and where this can really create unexpected wins is this example here, a case in the United States, in the state of Indiana, where a farmer used his yield map and his his soil map, that's what you can see on screen here image-wise, to win a lawsuit against the state of Indiana regarding flooding on his farm from a water control structure. And he was able to use his farm data in order to show that it was the flooding and not farming practices that led to the losses he experienced. So it ended up being an $800,000 award from the courts, and it really rested on his previous decision to collect and analyze and maintain robust data sets that showed what he had done and his historical yields and so on. So kind of an unusual, but yet I think really profound example of where a good data practice was not just being used in the most conventional sense in terms of farm operations, but yield this unexpected and very important win for this producer in the courts. Now, as I said, that doesn't mean it's all easy, and there's a significant amount of skill in learning that's needed to happen in order to get to that point. And it's also about investing time and energy, right? Being strategic, as we saw with the notion of planning. Being willing to be in for the long haul. So 45% of American growers surveyed in 2021 still identify that data collection step as a fundamental challenge. I think it's very consistent with what I've heard both anecdotally and in surveys here in Canada. But that does not mean it's all despair. It's rather we're on a learning curve together, and it's about maintaining that investment and looking to create those wins and focused use of your data within your farm to drive it forward. So, how do you get there? It's recognizing that data management isn't something that just happens. It's not about buying the technology. It's about making that plan and putting it to work. But it is an investment of both time and money. And it requires that consistent early action in order to drive results into the future, right? It's an iterative process you're also going to be getting better at. And over the course of years and time, accumulating that as a new skill set, a new, foundational capability within your farm is really the future. So that's really, I think, my quick arc through sort of a data 101 of like how, some of the foundations and fundamentals you need to have in your toolbox, but equally, where you need to get to in terms of the adoption and integration of data within your farm business. Now, in the remaining time, I want to get really practical and take that to the next into the next piece here around contracts, and really just give you a sense of how answers some of the questions that you may have. Oops, sorry here. As I said earlier, the content here comes out of a guidebook on contracts that we produce. You can find that on our website. Lets you go significantly deeper. But here I'll just give you sort of a top level sense of why these are so important and why you should pay attention. But let me say, this is not legal advice. I'm not a lawyer. But at the end of the day, if you have significant questions and concerns about ag tech contracts you're engaging in, do call a lawyer. They're there to support you both in ways like real estate transactions as well as here. So, they can be an important trusted advisor when it comes to your ag tech contracts as well. Now, what exactly is a contract? I mean, at the end of the day, we use contracts to facilitate business relationships. We use them all the time. I'm sure you've used them all the time in other aspects of your business. But it's really a way that we make promises concrete and enforceable. So it sounds simple, but of course, it's really about how that's done, which will determine whether you're happy and whether the other side of the contract is happy as well. Now, when it comes to ag tech and ag data contracts, the real key thing to know is that they tend to come in a bundle. So there's multiple agreements that are presented to you together. This is a good example from FCC Ag Expert. You have the terms of service and as well the ag data use agreement or policy. They come to you together as a package. And honestly, if you want to look at one copy of an agreement, this is the one I would look at. It's very simple. It's very easy to read, and that's not just because this is an FCC event. This is something I say repeatedly. They've done a nice job of presenting this in a more readable format than most. Now, in terms of the content, there's some really repeated things that you'll observe if you dive into any ag tech contract. You can see a bunch of them on screen. What I would really highlight is probably the first two, the scope. What is included in the contract? What kinds of data? What kinds of services? And then around third-party access. Is the data provided to any outside organization beyond you and that ag tech company? That may happen for a very good reason. For example, the ag tech company may be using a data processor to analyze your data and provide insights back that are part of that service. So it's really just to be aware of that and to look out for that as a key piece. The other one I would flag for it's worth paying attention to is what happens at the end. So termination and portability. typically what you'll see is that you're able to get a copy of your original data both at the end and ask for the deletion of that from the service, or of course to request a copy, so-called data portability, midway through the agreement as well. Here, I'm just trying to advance a slide. Now, because we're talking about digital services, the signature is important, and what you're going to have here is really you're going to be clicking accept on screen rather than signing on paper. The key thing is this is the same thing. The law sees that as the same fundamental thing, and so you need to take seriously and read the contract before you click accept. Very now famous case of a Saskatchewan grower who was found to have agreed to a contract by a thumbs up emoji in a text message, ended up being very expensive for them. This is continuing in the courts, but it just underlines the fact that electronic agreements are really just as strong as anything you might sign on paper. And my final note here on contracts, it's actually a really positive thing. There's a trend towards more plain language in contracts, which makes them more readable, like I said with the FCC Ag Expert contract. And another version of, or another manifestation of that is the Ag Data Transparent Organization, which is a US-based organization, but that has a number of Canadian members. And actually, EMILI is a member of the organization. And Ag Expert was one of the very first software tools from a Canadian company that was certified as ADT certified. And what it does is basically ask the company to respond to 11 questions about their contracts in pretty plain language, and then it publishes those answers online. And of course, it checks to make sure those answers are congruent and in agreement with what's actually in the contract. So for any ADT certified company, and you see on the left, there's a good snapshot of different companies there. You can click and then find out their actual answers to how they handle data and so on. And it's a really great way to learn more about specific companies or about how ag tech companies handle data in general without having to page through the longer and potentially more difficult to read contracts. So definitely a website worth checking out, and you'll certainly find lots of very well-known ag tech companies on there as well. So really I've reached the end here of my time, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to connect with you all. It's great to be able to reach out all the way across the country here with some of this content. My 3 takeaways for you, really just revising what I went over here today. 1, you want to make sure you are specific about your data. Make sure you're talking plainly about what data you're putting to use for what purpose, and that'll take you quite far. Data planning is farm planning, but you need to invest in it consistently to create that value and to create a real change inside of your farm business. And then lastly, contracts matter. Read the contracts. That's where you're going to get a bunch of the really important answers that you're looking for about how that specific ag tech provider is handling your data. And in a lot of ways, the information you're looking for is there. And I'd really encourage you to spend a bit of time if you have questions or if you're looking for more information, either in the contract or at the ADT website for those that are certified, to learn more about the practices. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Really appreciate it. Look forward to connecting with you all at another time. If you want to dive deeper into any of this, please contact me through our website. We'd be happy to chat with any of you at any time about ag tech or ag data. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dan, for all of that information. And I think it's safe to say we can give you a thumbs up for doing a good job. We have so much to think about with what Dan just shared with us, especially when it comes to those online agreements. I want to know, how are you feeling? Put it in the chat. Do you need a stretch of your hand maybe for all of the notes that you're writing down? May I suggest to you a little office chair or tractor cab yoga? Just take a big stretch, have a drink of water, and let's saddle up for our next speaker. Brett Gardiner is the most awarded announcer in Western sports history, having been named the Canadian Pro Rodeo Announcer of the Year for the past 13 consecutive seasons. Brett can be found behind the microphone at many of the industry's most celebrated events. He knows the unique culture that is the agriculture industry and the impacts that it has on our mental health. I am delighted that he is here to share his stories and strategies for mental health performance and motivation. Please help me welcome Brett Gardiner to the stage.
Caitlin,
How are you?
You?
We're ready. I got him warmed up for you.
Man,
Take it
so
away.
good. So good. Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to learn about tractor cab yoga. So I have to tell you, that's something I've never heard of, Caitlin. So hopefully everybody's had a moment, for some tractor cab yoga. But I'm so excited to spend the next few minutes with all y'all from across the world, from border to border and sea to sea. So I just have to say, first and foremost, so excited to be here. Thanks everybody for taking time out of your day to join us all here. And thank you to FCC for just championing wonderful events like this throughout the season and throughout the year. We've had this opportunity, and I know that a lot of you are watching, a lot of the presenters already mentioned, we've got to hang out 5 or 6 times together as a group and in person and all these things. So to me, it kind of feels like speed dating. Not that I've ever been a part of speed dating, but now it's like, okay, 20 minutes, let's rock and roll and just, have the time of our lives together. So here it goes. Who am I? First of all, I think it's important you kind of understand how I show up today. And like Caitlin mentioned, my name is Brett Gardiner. And if anyone from across the world knows me a little bit from a public stance, it's the fact that I've had the opportunity to spend the last kind of 2 decades announcing Western sporting events across the world, the Canadian Finals Rodeo to the Calgary Stampede and kind of everywhere in between. And it has been a wonderful journey that I've got to be a part of. But I also want you to know how I show up today a little bit more than that. And maybe more importantly, I show up as a father. My wife, Jacqueline, and I have 3 kids who we're darn sure so proud of. And I also show up as a psychologist. So I always say there's 2 parts of my life. There's one that's really public in front of everybody. And then there's this other life that's kind of quiet and slow. That's right. I can talk slow, but not right now. So with that, it's like I get to show up as an announcer, but I also get to be here as a psychologist. I'm a registered psychologist in the province of Alberta. And I do just want to acknowledge that this work today is separate from that work. My doctor works in sports and performance psychology. So if you had to give me a title alongside mental performance coach, it would be as a performance psychologist. And it really comes from a few different places. To give you some more context, that's like, first and foremost, I friggin' love people. I just love people. And I love helping if I can. And I love the agricultural industry and what it stands for, because that's what I've been a part of since the day I was born, and the generations of my family that preceded me all had a firm grip and grasp in the agricultural industry. And finally, to give some more context of why I'm coming from where I'm coming at today, I kind of went through my own journey and my own struggles with being on the road and being an announcer and trying to be a dad and trying to make hay and trying to do all the things. And there just came a time in my journey when it's like, geez, I felt like Heather mentioned earlier today, so many things that she said I resonated with. It's like, I found my place in a bit of overwhelm. I found my place, kind of full of anxiety and struggling with bouts of depression and kind of battling through that. And there came a time in my own story and journey when it's like, geez, I'd like to do a little bit of a better job to try and support myself. And amongst that, I learned that I certainly was so not alone in this world of kind of mental health. I said there was 2 big takeaways in my journey. First and foremost, I realized I couldn't do it alone. And then secondly, I just wasn't alone. And so that's really what inspires me to be a mental health advocate and to come and join all of you wonderful people and to talk about it a little bit today. So I want to just acknowledge, it's like, why does the conversation matter? And I think Heather did a phenomenal job right off the top of the presentation about acknowledging why it matters. Why does it matter in this industry? And I'm going to just lean on her statistics for a minute. So I hope I got them right. 3 out of 4 farmers acknowledged that they were experiencing like higher than average stress. And she talked about the 3 reasons why. And it's like that loss of control and uncertainty, the financial stressors, the lack of time in this big, heavy workload. Now, just so you know, from a psychologist standpoint, 3 out of 4 people that experience higher than normal stress, that is statistically higher than the general population. So again, why? Well, we love this industry. It is so incredible. It's just phenomenal people. The culture is so beautiful, but we also see higher rates of stress. We also see higher than normal rates of things like anxiety and depression, which we often refer to as kind of the big two in our game. The heavy hitter, and I'm going to jump in there for just a second, we also see higher rates of suicidal ideation and suicidal completion. And it's just sometimes really a tough pill to swallow when we consider that people in this incredible occupation and industry are struggling from a mental health standpoint. But that's just the fact of the matter. So it's like, what can we do? I think with the conversation today and acknowledging that it's an important conversation to have, I just want you to keep in mind moving forward over the next few minutes, it's like, which role do we play? What role can we play in this conversation as we do move forward? Is it someone who maybe needs to reach in and support someone that we really care about? Or are you maybe in a position that you need to reach out for yourself and try and find the support that you may need? I think that's another comment in relation to Heather's comment. I mean, there's lots of coaches and lots of professionals that sometimes can help do that. And I'm going to have to pay her a commission because I stole the line of, do your best and maybe hire the rest. Sometimes we need some support from the outside just to get us through. I know in my story and journey, I certainly needed that as well. So certainly things to consider as we jump through today. So as I switch gears on you, and now that I've offered some context to where I'm kind of coming from, I want to talk about operationalizing some of those things. And so many of the stories today were around having an appropriate plan of action for when things get tough. And I think that's a lot about what I want to spin on today. So I think first and foremost, when it comes to mental health, it's like so many things in the world, we have to be able to acknowledge that something's up. I think one of the most important pieces of this puzzle is to be able to acknowledge where we are at. If you're just to take a moment as you're sitting there right now, wherever you're at in the tractor cab, or you're hanging out in the office, or you're sitting at the kitchen table watching this or listening to this online, it's like, where are you at from a mental health standpoint? How am I feeling? And I think one of the things that we can often do, and I often speak in the language of numbers because I identify as a male and have a very kind of black and white thinking male brain. It's like, where am I from 0 to 10? One of the things that I think is important is like, okay, where am I today? I'm at a 5. Okay, so what does a 5 mean to you? Right? Really kind of leaning in and starting to be a detective on like, where are you at? Why are you there? I think those are really important things to start with, because we first and foremost have to acknowledge that maybe we could use some help in this area, or maybe I can make a change. That's really where I spin into this idea of like, mindset matters. How are we stepping into this conversation about mental health? Sometimes when we're kind of guarded or we're shut off, they're really difficult conversations to have. And a lot of times that's because in the agricultural industry, there's this beautiful stoicism. It's such a hardworking, over-functioning culture, but it's also a culture that it's hard to give what we haven't received. For those of us, as we transition through the generations, there's a lot of us that grew up not necessarily getting a lot of emotional conversation in our homes. I know I never had that. Just to give you some more context, I'm 42 years old. My dad, he's nearly 80, and he's unbelievable. But we often never had those conversations about kind of feelings and emotions and how to process them, how to work through them, or what they actually meant. So I think it's really important to try and lean into some of those things, even in our good days and even in our bad days, to try and educate ourselves as best we can. Brings me to my second point, man. Education is awesome, and vulnerability has got to be a non-negotiable. I think one of the greatest things in my journey is that I was able to educate myself about myself. I kind of learned what made me tick. I kind of learned what my triggers were. I started to do some of that work that Heather and Dan and Mark were talking about, like even that core values work of understanding who we are and how we're showing up. Because when we think about those moments that are tough, we need to be able to go back now and reflect on some of those so that I can move forward in a healthier way. So education is awesome, and vulnerability is a non-negotiable, things that we have to keep in mind. So not only did I start to educate myself about myself, but I also started to learn just about mental health in general. And even if there was a chance for some of you to start to kind of peel back the layers on that, I think that's really important. So how do we educate ourselves about mental health? What actually is it? And there's some of us on the other line or the other end of this call. It's like, I don't know. I was in that boat, and not that long ago. It's like I didn't understand that mental health was something that we all had, something that we all kind of worked through. I didn't understand that it was, oh, it's like thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and the way I show up, and it affects my mood, and it maybe affects how I interact with other people that I care about, not only friends, but also my family. It plays a role in most everything that we do. So I started to educate myself. What was these things like anxiety and depression? Because we see a lot of them in the ag industry. In my own story, I always say I'm a real people pleaser. I want everybody to like me. I'm in the front of everybody on the stage at the Calgary Stampede and all these things. But it can be a lonely place sometimes, right? It can be overwhelming. It can be this big task, and I'm trying to do all these things. And, you know, like Mark said, wear all these hats, but sometimes we can kind of get lost in it. I had to take a step back and educate myself what was going on. For me, it was this anxiety piece that I was kind of working through because I just didn't know what it was. Kind of led me at times kind of in and out of these bouts of depression, and I just kind of had to fight through it. But I had to fight with no tools in the beginning because I just didn't understand what it was. So when I was able to educate myself, what does anxiety look like and feel like in me? And please don't let me project my story onto you. Everybody's got theirs. Everybody is at the place they're at, and that is okay. We're all at different levels, especially in this conversation, but had to be able to educate myself enough about those things, because then I was able to name it to tame it. We talk about the idea of name it to tame it. It's like the same thing when the check engine light goes in or on in the truck, right? It's telling us that something is up. Are we able to start to recognize in ourselves when something is up? The sooner we can get a handle on that thing, the sooner that we can try and find a solution to help us through it. I want to jump ahead to another idea too, and we talk a lot about it in the ag industry, but it's like in the area of mental health, like so many times it's been mentioned today, like culture and context really matter. I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind in this unique population is when we're dealing with these conversations that surround mental health or mental performance, this culture in which you work, the hours in which you work, the unique financial stressors, the workload, a lot of those things are unique to this industry. That is stressful in itself. So I often think there's two ways we can do this, right? It's like we accept that we are in this unique culture in which most of us love. Maybe some of us have a love-hate relationship with it. But it's like, this is the industry in which I want to raise my family. So what do I need to do to be healthy within it? If those things that can't change aren't going to change, what am I willing to do to make sure that I can make some changes within my own life so that I can be healthy within the context of the ag industry? I always said as a psychologist, sometimes we're like, hey, you know, maybe you need to change occupations. And I think that's a conversation that certainly sometimes need to be had. But in the ag industry, so many of us just love it so much. So I think, where's that balance? Where's that balance? Will we ever get there? I'm not too sure, but it brings me to my next point. I think one of the things that we also need to do is we need to be able to battle to our baseline, but we also need to try and battle for balance. I always love the idea of like battle, because it's like, man, we got to go to work on it. It's just not going to happen by itself. So when I say battle for baseline, let's talk about this a little bit. It's like when I say baseline, like that's when we are in a place that I would consider healthy. So there's some joy in my life. There's some contentment. Maybe there's a moment or two to kind of catch my breath. What does that look like and feel like for me? It's often time with my family. But what does it look like for you? If you're to just kind of reflect here for a moment, it's like, what's baseline? What feels good? What's your baseline behavior? Because if we know what that's like, we can then start to implement some tools to try and get there. Now, to acknowledge culture again, a lot of you overfunctioners, you can work really hard. Calving season, right, can be a struggle. It's 20-hour days, it's night shifts, it's all the things. Harvest season, it's like there is no 8-hour days and 10 hours of sleep and 3 square meals. It doesn't happen, right? So a lot of those times we can get away from our baseline. As we get away from our baseline, it can put stress not only on ourselves, but also on our system. And when I say system, like that family system. So it adds some more stress in those particular situations. So I think, how can we find a way to battle ourselves back to baseline or battle ourselves back to balance? That is where we insert the conversation a lot of time about like self-care. How are we taking care of ourselves in our own unique way that I can put a little gas back in the tank? I get to work with some tremendous people, and I often tell this story because I'm really honored to get to work with some special forces units in the Canadian military, and they often talk to me in that language about getting back to baseline. They'll say, hey, we need 10 more percent. And I often think about that way too. I feel like I'm 80% away from my baseline. Well, let's just get you 10. Let's build you a little bit more capacity so that we can get you to a place where you can stay regulated. Oh, I can catch my breath and I'm a little bit healthier. My experience in the mental health world is like, I wish there was that magic thing that could just fix it overnight. It just doesn't exist. It takes a little bit of work, but it is certainly worth it. So as we're trying to battle back to baseline, how can we just grab ourselves that 10% and then hopefully that 20 and that 30 and ease ourselves back? Especially because of the fact that we're overfunctioners. All of you can handle so much. And sometimes they say it's like you're walking around the house and maybe your wife says, hey, maybe you should just sit down and relax. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to do. We know that that's exactly what we need, but sometimes it can be the hardest thing to do because we're so wired to go because of this beautiful culture. It's like, how do we get ahead? A lot of times it's like, I will just work harder. Even though it doesn't make sense to us, it's like, no, I need to slow down. I need to catch my breath. But there's just this feeling that often kind of drives us like we have to go, we have to try and succeed. We have to move forward. So it's important to have those open and honest conversations with that and try and navigate some of those feelings so that we can help get ourselves back to baseline and we can challenge ourselves to also find some form of balance. Now, there's also that thing, it's like, hey, balance is BS. And there's days I think it might be, but I encourage you all to try and just battle to get a little bit closer to that baseline. It allows us to show up often a little more healthier from a mental standpoint, which is really important, at least to me, and I hope it is to you too. Another thing that I kind of want to riff on today is the idea that the farmhouse is different than the field. And we talked about the idea of context, and I mentioned the family system. When we're struggling, it certainly has an impact on our family. If we're to just kind of pull out a little bit here and take that 30,000-foot view, and we look at our family as a system, we often want to start to try and acknowledge, where does the anxiety come from in that system? Because again, we've talked a lot about the generational capacity through a few speakers today. It's like, okay, maybe you're still forming with your parents, grandparents, right? Maybe there's a next generation. We have a lot of farms that are 3, 4, 5 generations, and a lot of them still working together. So one of the things that's really important is the ability to also have kind of that systems view and approach. Where does that anxiety come from within our system? And when I say anxiety in a system, I don't necessarily mean clinical anxiety, but I mean, like, where's the stress coming from? Is it conflict between generations? Are there kind of tough spots? But again, the first thing that we have to do is to be able to acknowledge where that's coming from so that we can try and start to make some of those shifts. A lot of times we talk about farmer mental health, but again, who's taking care of the farmer? And we have to make sure that that is still a priority. And, pardon me, I understand that there's a variety of genders and could be on this call today, but for the sake of the conversation, it's like the farm wife and what role they play and the unique stressors, because they often have to hold the stress of the farmer or of the kids or of the system. So what does that look like within your unique family system? And are they getting the care and attention that they need? Are those lines of communication open? Next thing I want to roll on is the idea of like, how do we spend our time? So in the mental health context, I think we can spend our time a couple of ways. We can spend our time preparing, or we can spend our time reacting. Okay. So as we take an opportunity, if we're all just to kind of quietly do it together, if we take a chance to reflect on maybe some emotional moments or maybe some kind of tough times, and how do we spend our time? So how do we spend our time? Or either we're preparing or reacting. So I think it's really important to acknowledge this idea. And it was like having that plan together. So from a mental health standpoint, it's like if we take a moment to just kind of lean into one another and think for just a moment and reflect back on some of those moments that were tough. Maybe it was personal and maybe it was kind of my own personal feelings and thoughts, or maybe it was a struggle in a relationship that I was having with my partner or my kids or something like that. If we reflect back on those moments that brought us some emotion, maybe brought us some tough times, that can help now kind of fuel us moving forward. So now we can look at those situations and ask ourselves, how would I have done it different? How would I have liked to shown up? How would I have liked to felt? Right? I think that's an important question. Sometimes we don't set those emotional goals. Like, how would I want to feel? What do I want our day to look like moving forward? What do I want my partnership with my partner to look like? How do I want my family to look and to feel? So we can spend our time preparing for those moments, trying to be a bit vulnerable and open up those conversations, plant those seeds, or we can spend our time reacting. And I think so many times we get caught spending our time reacting because we're unclear, right? Because the financial stressors, because of those lack of times and those workload things, we're reacting to the things that we have to respond to. I think in the coaching space and in the performance psychology space, we want to prepare for those moments. Can we put the tools in your toolbox? Can you have those important conversations so that when it does hit, when harvest does come along, we've got a few more tools in the toolbox? Can we have these conversations in July, so in August, so that September's better? And I hope you can kind of work through those moments and find a way as a team and as a unit and as a family to be able to do that. And one of the things I want to leave you with is kind of, I'm going to take off a psychologist hat and a coach hat, and I just want to go and spin on the kind of cowboy language in what I have. And here's what I really hope for all of you around this quick conversation about mental health. And please let me acknowledge that, there's 100 different roads to head down. But I don't want you to let the tractor run out of fuel. So many times we get into a tough space and place, and if we could have got there sooner, it's like, geez, I'm feeling like there's this 10,000 pound weight on my chest. I just can't catch my breath. Sometimes we need to reach out and have somebody help kind of take some of that weight off of there. I want you to do that, man. So bad. And I also want you, again, now cowboy language here, y'all. I just hope you have a thing to help you for the thing. It's like, what's he talking about? It's like, do you have something that you can lean on? Do you have something that is healthy, that allows you to work through the tough times? Is it that friend that you can call? Is it that conversation with your partner? Is it seeking out some professional help, someone who is well, in tune with the agricultural industry? And if your answer is no, I really want to encourage you to try and find something that is going to support and help you in those tough times. I know, big, scary language, y'all. It's like, I just really want you to have the thing to help you when the thing hits. I hope you have an answer to that question. And I'm going to leave you with one more thing for the thing. We were chatting about this earlier as this group, and one of the things that I try and live by, I always say, I'm currently amongst what we call the Chase the Good movement. And it started with me and my family a few years ago, right when COVID kind of hit. And I was really kind of working through some things, and it was a really tough time. And my daughter, who was 9 at the time, came in my office, and this was right after that I had 91 performances cancel in 9 days. Those are a couple numbers I'll never forget. As a sports announcer and broadcaster, that's how I made my living. And it was like, it went away just in a week of time, in the blink of an eye. And again, like so many, I was lost. There were these financial stressors. I didn't know how I was going to support my family. I didn't know what I was going to do. There was so much uncertainty. I had no confidence. I had no competence. And my daughter said, "Hey, Dad, we're going to be okay." And I said, "What do you mean? How are we going to be okay? How do you know this?" She said, "Hey, we're just going to do what you always tell us. And that's just make sure we keep chasing the good stuff in the world." And that was the day that it kind of became our family motto, and it became our mindset. And it's still what drives me today. Of all the things, and I know that I've thrown a lot of stuff at you and some big ideas and opened up some things and got some things started and didn't get some finished. But at the end of the day, I just hope that you can chase what's good in the world. I think it's so important that we're intentional in how we show up, and we have a choice. We can choose to find the things that bring us down and kind of tear this world apart, or we can choose to find the glimmers in this beautiful world, and we can chase what's good. And I hope you can all do exactly that. Thank you so much for hanging out. I appreciate you so very, very much.
Brett, taste the good.
Love
I
it.
got it here. Well, I think we went black for a little bit, but I think we're okay. Brett, are you okay to go a little overtime with me?
Yes, please. I'd love
Okay.
to. I
We
felt like I was
have-
rolling today.
We have some PBR fans in the
Ugh.
room, and I'm going to ask you to dig real deep and
Okay.
put on your proverbial cowboy hat. Okay?
Okay.
You've got 8 seconds. Give us that pep talk that we need to hear to head into our next growing season.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Oh, wow. I can do it. I can do it. Ladies and gentlemen, you are about to witness one of the greatest public speakers, most sought after transition tactical for emerging young farmers anywhere on the face of the planet. As we prepare for this phenomenal growing season, I hope you hug your loved ones close, because coming up next at Peak Heritage Consulting, Annessa Good-Hassard.
Bravo.
That's all I had.
That is amazing. Thank you so much. I appreciate everything that you've done for us here today and what you're doing for mental health in agriculture. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Friends, Brett already took my job. I don't even have to announce. I hope I can announce just as good as him for our next speaker. We are going to end this afternoon talking about one of the hottest topics for many of you in the room today, and that's farm transition. Whether you are just starting on your journey into the transition planning or you're closing one chapter of the plan and moving on to the next, we could all use some tips, advice, and shared stories from other producers around this vital piece of business planning. FCC has a team of business advisors that work with farm families across the country to gain clarity, identify goals, and determine the next steps in their transition journey. Our final speaker today has worked on that team, as well as her family's private consulting firm, on financial management and transition planning, and now has her own consulting company. Annessa Good-Hassard knows firsthand the complexities, unique challenges, and opportunities for young farmers going through this process, and she herself navigates it in her own farming family. Annessa is going to join me on the stage. She's going to share with you a few key points, but we have so much time for Q&A, so please, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat or the moderated Q&A box. Please help me welcome to the stage Annessa Good-Hassard. Welcome, my friend.
Hello. How are you?
I think they're warmed up and ready for you.
Okay, perfect. Well, I feel like I'm ready to go to the rodeo right now for sure. So thank you very much, Brett, for that introduction. So today, the goal is to kind of move through our slides rather quickly to have time for Q&A. And I've been scrolling the chat as we've heard from the other amazing speakers today. And so there's already some good questions in there. Again, a little bit about me. My family farm is north of Calgary, Alberta. My husband and I have recently moved home and are taking over the family farm, as well as my succession or consulting business. And so I often joke with families, I am on the succession roller coaster with all of you. As a family, we're going to experience the highest of highs, but we're also buckled in together and we'll certainly experience some lows. But what today's great speaker so far has shown us is what we can control within this ride of life. And so this is just a quick slide that I like to always show, because what it shows to me is that there's two critical components to agriculture that is different than any other family ran business. And so this diagram was actually created by my dad, Merle Good, for his consulting business. And he created it in the early 80s. And what's really cool is it stands true today. And so what it's showing on the left-hand side of the diagram, my definition of succession planning is this is the transfer of the business. So who has chosen farming or ranching as their career? Doesn't matter to me if you still work off part-time or are planning to come back, but this is the business which works off of income. This is also where we now say, because of the size, scale, and complexity of operations, no longer are we just focused on transferring assets when we think of transition planning, but what I like to call it is, are we setting the successor up for success? And this is through critical roles, responsibilities, and managerial involvement over time to truly be able to manage the business. But then, as you can see here, there's a really intentional line. And on the right-hand side of the diagram, this is my definition of estate planning. So to me, this is the transfer of assets pre and post death. Now, when we think about our family farms and ranches, our land and our quota are our greatest wealth assets. Left-hand side of the diagram is income, right-hand side of the diagram is wealth. If your land is owned corporately, I still want you to think as the perception that the land is personally owned and would be in this personal wealth bubble. And then, of course, we have our off-farm asset bubble that if I was to draw to scale in agriculture, how big would that bubble be in relation to the land or quota? Teeny, teeny, tiny, right? Because as we know in agriculture, every dollar goes back into the farm. And so when I look at this whole circle, that's how I created my definition of transition, which is a combination of both and is proactive rather than reactive. You've heard all of us speakers today say this statement in kind of our own twist of ways, but what I really hope we take home to encourage the empowerment piece and why it's so important to start planning wherever you and your family are at today is when we're proactive, it's not personal. When we wait and are reacting to a person, situation, or thing, now it's personal, and we all understand how that can impact our family dynamics. For any of you that are watching today that are maybe not going back to a family farm, but are in the industry, having the recognition and understanding of this will set you miles ahead and build that rapport with your customers. And so really what this slide shows is that our business plan and our estate plan are dependent on each other. So what that means is any decision we make to grow or diversify the business will impact the estate plan's feasibility. So for example, on this, if the will says that the farming child has to buy out siblings from land, for example, for X million, we need to make sure that the business plan could support that tomorrow in case mom and dad's will was read. Vice versa, if mom and dad are saying we're going to live off of our off-farm asset bubble for retirement income purposes, then that's giving more income opportunity in the business because we're not touching that bubble. But then how are we addressing that in the estate plan if in the will the off-farm asset bubble was left to non-farm heirs? So this really shows the push and pull of any decision we make and why it's so important to check into both sides of the diagram frequently. And so some great tools. I know Stacy from FCC has already shared, but for the income discussion on the business side, FCC has an incredible cost of living calculator. This is huge. How much income are we taking out of the business for personal living? And then as well, on my own website, I have a free compensation resource for farm families to work through and give you a template for when you're working with your accountants, because this is one of the key areas I see of contention in family dynamics. Because the problem I see is people tie their value to their compensation. And we all know in agriculture, none of us are paid to our worth. And so working around those dynamics. And so again, the ultimate piece here is if any key farm member passed away prematurely and the will was read, is the farm or ranch business financially viable and sustainable? And so when we're doing our transition planning, I always like to think out of it of two lenses. Lens one is our long-term progression of creating our plan over time with our key tax and legal and financial planner support. But then I also want that second lens always in place that says, if an emergency struck, are we prepared? Again, controlling what we can control. And the biggest piece there, sorry for this slide, is that I need to ensure that junior generation has up-to-date wills as well. I cannot stress that enough. It terrifies me in my consulting work how many grandchildren or the junior generation's children are not accounted for in our will planning. And so please do not leave it to the Court of Canada to dictate the most important asset, if you want to think of it that way, of our family members. And so I'm not going to spend too much time on this today, but really what I share this slide for is to grant all of us on our succession journeys. We need to grant ourselves, which is really important, and our fellow family members a lot of grace through this journey. This is a lot of the roadblocks that come up when people say, why is succession planning so hard? And the reason I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it today is because Mark did an excellent job of showing all the different hats we wear in family farm business. So I can't take my daughter hat off at any time. I also can't decide to not go feed the cows because it's cold outside. So my CFO hat of running a business. And then also the CEO hat is a critical hat that I wear in owning part of our family business and the eventual progression over time. And so if you wanted to take a screenshot of this slide, I think it really shows that we're not alone. And a lot of the issues we face can feel isolating, but we do have to recognize that this is where we can benefit from bringing in third-party advisors. And so if you were going to take a picture of a slide today, and again, there will be a recording, this is probably one of the slides I would take. My key message to you all is you can have it all, but you cannot do it all yourself. And so this is where, because again, the size, scale, complexity of transition plans today, we really need to build our team. Traditionally in agriculture, we had potentially our accountant and our lawyer on our team. But as you can see in these three circles of family, ownership, and business, the team has now extended greatly. A great exercise I encourage families to do is take these three circles and everyone on your family farm, fill it out individually of who are the key contacts that you think of in those circles. So my family just did this exercise together, and my dad had, we'll call him Bob, listed in the business circle. And I was like, who the heck's Bob? And my dad said, well, this is why I think he's a key to our farm success, and this is why I have him on here. And so I'm sure you can guess the key next step was I needed to build a relationship with Bob, so that again, the long-term progression view of my own family succession plan, Bob is probably going to be a part of it, but the ultimate, if my dad was to pass away prematurely, I know that Bob's a trusted contact that I could go to and he would support us. The star in the middle is to represent advisors such as myself, FCC's business advisors, others in the industry that look at more of a holistic view of the entire operation instead of specializing in any one space. But also, again, as Brett alluded to earlier in his presentation, I love that conversation. We need a communication champion designated in your family that helps facilitate the conversations amongst these technical advisors, books the meetings, gathers the squirrels together, and often that does stereotypically fall on a female role in the family farm. But if that is the case in your family, we need to recognize and appreciate the role and demanding nature that takes. And so making sure that we're taking other things off of their plate so they can specialize in that area. And so I went through really quickly, but again, the goal today was that we would have lots of time for Q&A. So Caitlin, I'm excited. Let's hit the Q&A.
I am so ready. There are so many good questions. Annessa, thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, you ready?
Ready.
The term generational wealth means different things to different people. A concern on our farm is how do you achieve this while maintaining a safeguard that one individual or one generation doesn't sell out?
It's a very eloquently worded
I started with
question,
the hard one.
Yeah, so, very well done. For sure. So the first thing I think we need to be cognizant of is exactly as they alluded to, how do you define wealth? I certainly don't believe that wealth is only our assets or our net income at the end of the year or our profits, but that also the reason family farms and family ranches have been able to stand the test of time is because the family is such an important piece of that wealth. And so recognizing that if we're looking to keep the business side viable and sustainable, the goal that I sit down with every family that I consult with is at the same time, a competing priority at the same time is how do we protect the family? And so my first piece of advice to that question would be being cautious of our language. I find sometimes, my dad and his consulting and things like that, he would use the word control a lot. And as a millennial, I had issue with that and pushed back on it a lot because I don't want to be controlled. But where I think language is important is when I haven't met a family yet that they haven't had the objectives, protect the senior generation because they worked so hard to get where they are today, protect their children, and protect the land and the legacy. And so when we change our language to protect, everybody's shoulders come down and we can usually get a lot more buy-in to what are some proactive pieces to put in place. And so that's where we can be really creative with as advisors, where we can come up with clauses and scenarios while alive, for example, in your operating agreements. So partnership agreement, unanimous shareholders agreement to protect what I call the quick flip of selling that asset too quickly. Access agreements. So if off-farm children are inheriting farm assets, making sure the business has access for a specific amount of time. All of these pieces can be put in place to slow down a potential sale. And on top of that, you can also have conditions that are triggered in your estate plan to protect against that mentality. So lots of options to prevent the quick flip. But again, that's probably the most common fear of why parents are cautious to proactively put children on title of ownership. But I'm saying let's put our seatbelts on so we can start this journey faster, but with the appropriate documentation.
And Eloquent answer for an eloquent question. Thank you for that. So something, Annessa, that you do time and time again when I've seen you speak and talk to audiences is we're not actually talking about our own family. We're talking about the neighbor's family. So I have a scenario question for you. So
Perfect.
Let's say the neighbor's family, the older generation, the parents, have not quite finalized their will yet. How, as we, the younger generation, how can we encourage them to get that finished up without seeming like we're nagging?
Yeah, for sure. It's a very, very delicate dance, right? Absolutely. And so, first of all, one of my kind of quick comebacks is I will say to junior generation, do you have an estate plan? Because we have to be very careful not to point fingers at mom and dad if we're sitting here not having a will for our own family, ownership of shares, land, equipment, etc. And a lot of people say, well, we don't own much, but again, we don't need to be tying ourselves up in courts if it's farm trucks and things like that. We don't have to wait until we own 50% of the company, for example. So the other thing is it's a lot less scary when we start little, owning fewer assets, and then grow and progress over time. In regards to parents not choosing to not share or update their will, this to me really depends on ages and stages and income. So if you as the off-farm child are fully dependent on the farm business to support and feed yourself and your family, obviously the urgency of this may be more than someone that has off-farm income right now to help support. And why I say that is because the only time I cry coming home from family consultation meetings, driving home, crying in my car, is when I've sat across from a 45, 50-year-old couple that have just found out that their farm dreams are not viable and sustainable because their 80-year-old parents have finally passed away or declared the situation. And there's no time for plan B. But my challenge to that as junior generation is if you are playing defense because you know that mom and dad are not willing to update or share, then you have to take responsibility and accountability that you are diving in, putting all your eggs in one basket. And that's a very unfortunate place to be. It's very difficult. Hopefully through events such as like this, there's so many articles out today, things like that. Tax is a great driver to update our estate plan and be really proactive with that, that we can encourage families to update their wills. And again, just a little nugget, I find there's a hesitancy to update because parents are trying to write the will that will be read when they're 99. We need to stop. There's too much life changes, marriages, grandbabies, all of this that needs to happen. So I really encourage you to write your wills for max 3 years. And a lot of times I see parents' shoulders come down and they say, okay, I just need to be comfortable with what's on paper for the next 3 years. And again, that provides us the flexibility to match the business plan. If you are going out to grow, diversify, another child comes back, things like that, to account for the plan.
Perfect. One last question for you that I have here. And again, we're talking the neighbors.
Yeah, of course.
The neighbors have off-farm siblings. How do we navigate that in this day and age when it comes to transition planning, when we have kids on farm versus kids off farm?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the most complex and the most broad because each situation is so dependent. Truly what, is coming down to that is the fair versus equal conversation. And so again, I think what's really important in this conversation, for those of you on the call that we can be proactive, is something I saw in Alberta here in 2015 when oil and gas crashed and we saw a huge spike in COVID, was all of a sudden off-farm kids showed up on the farm step and said, hey, I want to be part of the farm. And meanwhile, the farming sibling that had been home for years was like, what? how are we now supposed to divide this? And so I think some proactive conversations that can be held with some families I work with. Is there is there an age deadline of when children can commit to come home and be part of the business? If a sibling comes back later on during the time, will their share come out of mom and dad's pot and not what I, as a farming child long term, have acquired to this date? Those are some pretty important conversations we need to have. In regards to true off-farm children, this is where, again, being proactive as a family to say, in our fair versus equal, it's so critical for parents to build that off-farm wealth bubble. And again, in agriculture, this has not been typically what we've done. But for all of us, I think we can take that as our generation forward when we become the senior generation, is truly taking time and opportunity to invest in that off-farm bubble, because it gives us so much time and flexibility. Key questions I ask in my consulting: is $1 of cash equal to $1 of land? Obviously, we know one is liquid, one is not. If farm assets are going to off-farm children, how do we secure access for a very long time to the farm business to support that? But honestly, Caitlin, what I find in my consulting now, the parents are talking about the grandchildren. We're almost skipping their own children's generation, because as we all know, the concern is if the farm family successor ever sells out at any point in their family line, they are multimillionaires. Meanwhile, our off-farm children are trying to afford a mortgage in an urban center, for example. And so again, that's where, as advisors, we're getting creative when we talk about a potential flip, or how do we stop fracturing the family farm, but still provide opportunities for our off-farm children as well. And just really quick last point on this, I feel as an industry, we have not educated our off-farm children well about agriculture economics. And then we're frustrated with their lack of knowledge and understanding, but you don't know what you don't know. And so we talked about this, I know, at the last Young Farmer event, but I sat down with the family and just did really rough cowboy math, like super rough. And it took $67 of capital for mom and dad to make $1 of grocery money income on this farm. $67. But yet the off-farm child drove in and, as Mark said, saw the $1.5 million combine sitting in the yard. So we need to really make sure that we are educating and bringing the awareness of our capital costs in agronomics as well.
Annessa, thank you so much. You are just a wealth of knowledge in this topic, and amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Friends, I told you it was going to be great. We have so much information that was thrown at us today. I'm so happy that you all joined us. That's our time for today, but please watch your inbox for the recording that will be sent out to you in a few days, and share with others in your family or on your farm. You will also receive an email later today with some of the links shared, as well as an evaluation form. Please fill out the survey, as FCC is planning next year's events and they would love your feedback. I know a lot of us are working on calving, kidding, or lambing, and some will be hitting the field soon. I want to wish you the best of luck in the next season, and I look forward to seeing you at an event soon. Take care, friends.